Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite ways to fish a fluke, especially for fall bass fishing, but it works all times of year. You can adjust it to fish different depths of water and stuff like that, but today we're going to actually go out on the water and be fishing it for some fall bass, and that's the way we're going to be talking about in today's video. So stay tuned. Let's get right into it. So the way we're going to be fishing a fluke in today's video is going to be on a Pulsefish Lures jig head. It's like a scrounger type head, has a little plastic bill that comes up off the top of the head, and it will cause it to have an erratic action in the water. It's a bait that I've been throwing for years and years, especially in the fall. I've talked about it a couple times on the channel. I actually met the owner of the company in the BFL All-American that I qualified for a few years ago. Fished with that bait. He was using that bait and came in second place. He keyed me in on it during the tournament. I went and got some and then actually caught some fish on that as well. Brought it back to Pittsburgh here, and I've used it every fall since. It's such an excellent way to catch fish. When those fish start schooling, they start chasing bait. I use it on the three rivers here in Pittsburgh all the time, especially in the fall when they really start to chase those bait fish that are very, very small. And that's the way we're gonna rig it up in today's video. Everything will be linked down in the description below if you wanna check out any of the items that we're gonna use for today. And if you wanna order any of the Pulsefish Lures jig heads, if you use my code NQF10, you'll save 10% off your order on the website, and you'll be helping me out a ton. Anytime you purchase any of those products in the link below, you're helping me out a lot throughout the channel and to keep making videos like this for you guys. So we're gonna go through rod, reel, line first, then we're gonna talk about the actual bait selection and jig head selection, and then we're gonna go out on the water and show you how and where to fish this thing and catch a bunch of fish. So starting with the rod and reel selection, stemming off of the jig head selection, I fish mine on the 1/8 ounce jig head a lot, sometimes the 1/4 ounce, and then the 3/8 if I need to get a little bit deeper. Considering I'm usually throwing in that 1/8 to 1/4 ounce range, and the bait is really small, and I'm gonna use a small bait on as a trailer on this jig head, I am going to use basically what's my hair jig rod to fish this bait. So I have a Cashin Icon spinning rod, 7'6", medium light, fast action, to really allow me to get that far cast out there. And it also keeps them hooked really well once you stick them, and it has enough flex in it on those small hooks to keep that hook in the fish's mouth. That I pair up with a Shimano Sedona 2500, and I spool it with 10-pound test braid. Usually I use 15, but I put 10-pound test on my hair jig rod because it gets a farther cast. The thinner the diameter you can use, the further cast you're gonna be able to make. So I'll go with that diameter of braid, make that far cast, and on the end of that, I'll put an 8-pound test fluorocarbon leader. So basic, that's what I use for a hair jig. I've done a hair jig video before. There'll be more to come in the future, but I bought that rod specifically to fish hair jigs, and it makes an excellent Pulsefish Lures jig head rod as well because you can get that very far cast. Anytime you're fishing like a very, very light or finesse bait and you need that very far cast, that 7'6" spinning rod with 10-pound test braid over a 7-foot medium with 15-pound test braid, it's a huge difference on casting distance itself. Then when we're talking about jig head selection, I keep it really simple. Like I said, I use the 1/8 ounce 80% of the time. I use a 1/4 ounce the other 15% of the time, and then like 5% of the time, if I really need to get that bait down deeper, I'll throw a 3/8 specifically for this technique. We will do other videos on the scrounger head in the future. I use all the way up to the 5/8 ounce that they have. I'll throw bigger baits on it. It's a very versatile technique, but to fish for fall fish when they're feeding on this tiny little baby shad, the 1/8 and 1/4 is about as big as I'll go. And then any color will work, it does not matter. They come in a variety of colors. I use like the albino color, the white one's really good, just the plain lead smoky color one is very good. Any of the colors that they have on their website will work just fine. Use that to pair up with your bait fish color. They're not gonna look at the head very much. It's gonna come down to the actual minnow presentation you put on the back. When I'm selecting a bait to put on the back there, when they're feeding on those tiny bait fish, my #1 go-to is the Zoom Tiny Fluke. I have to special order them online. You don't usually see them in stores very often. It is a super, super small version of the Zoom Fluke, but that's the original Fluke that doesn't have like the belly cavity. It's not the Super Fluke, it's not the Super Fluke Junior. This thing's even smaller than the Super Fluke Junior, and it's maybe the size of your finger. It's very, very small. but it works excellent when they're feeding on that small bait fish. The other one that I use a lot is the Baby Z2 or the Z-Man Streaks 375. That I usually put on the 1/4 ounce head if the bait's just a little bit bigger and I want my bait to get just a little bit deeper. Doesn't usually pair too well on the 1/8 ounce. On the 1/8 ounce head, you really have to go with some small baits, like a 3-inch gulp minnow. You can use anything that's like in that 3-inch size or less that's a minnow profile. It works really, really well for this technique. So that's the breakdown. You basically just thread that bait right onto your jig head. Color, again, pick what you have for bait fish wise. I like the pearl white, stands out really well. If you have some translucent bait fish, you can go with some of the translucent colors. You could throw a chartreuse one on there if you wanted to. It's really up to you on color, but I usually go bait fish colors only. But that's it, thread it on there, tie it on, no other terminal tackle, and you're ready to go. So let's head out on the water. We're gonna show you how and where to fish this thing, and hopefully we'll catch a couple fish along the way. So now that we talked about the setup of this little Fluke rig, let's go ahead and fish this thing around and see if we can catch us a couple fish. We're throwing the baby Fluke. Like we talked about, you can throw different size Flukes, different size heads, dependent upon what type of bait fish they're feeding on, how shallow your fish are, all that kind of stuff. We have some very shallow fish today. They're pretty much right up on these creek mouths and points, trying to get as much food as they can. Oh, there was one chasing it right there. They're up there trying to get a bunch of food and eat and feed up for the winter coming up. So they got about 3 months before they're gonna be in like hibernation mode and can't really do anything else. So in between now and then, they're gonna try and fit as much food into their mouth as they can. Typically in the early fall, you're gonna have those young of the year bait fish that are very, very small. And because of that, those fish are gonna key in on those small bait fish and they will not eat larger baits, mostly because there's such an abundance of the small baits that they have no reason to bite a bigger bait because they know that the real ones are the little tiny ones. So that's why I like to use this one this time of year, this setup. And that's also, it's great for schooling fish as well. So a lot of these fish are gonna school this time of year, and it works really well for suspended or schooling fish. So basically all we're gonna do is just kind of wind this thing around and find some areas where I think the fish should be. See if we can get them to react. A lot of them today have been in groups. So if I can find one, I can catch multiple off the same spot. There's one right there. That was awesome. I literally watched him chase it all the way to the boat and he nabbed it and he thought it was just a little bait fish. Unfortunately, he's not a giant, but like I said, we're down on the Pittsburgh rivers. It's just one of the only places that you can really catch fish in the months of September because everywhere else sucks. And even though these guys are tiny, they still bite really, really well this time of year. So we're gonna get him back, see if we can catch us a couple more. Maybe there's a little school of them here or we'll just keep moving around until we find more. But that thing right there mimics these young of the year shad so good. If you're not fishing this bait in the month of September, it's one that I always, especially the Pittsburgh rivers, I fish this thing on the Pittsburgh rivers year round. I've been holding that one under wraps for a while, but if you guys fish the Pittsburgh rivers, the link will be down below. You can use my code NQF10. You'll save 10% off your order of these jig heads. And you can use any small bait fish imitating bait. And the way that these fish feed on tiny bait fish down here, it's just an absolute deadly technique on these fish down here. But if you fish anywhere else, I've used this on Lake Hartwell, anywhere that your fish feed on those tiny, tiny bait fish this time of year, this is a great technique to do it, no matter how big or small the fish are. So we're gonna get back to fishing. We'll show you how to fish this, and hopefully we'll catch us a couple more. Now, the nice part about this pulse head is that there's 2 ways to actually fish this little deal. One, if you have fish that are super fired up, or you can tell that those fish are literally chasing the bait fish that other ones are already biting, or they're big schooled up or anything like that, what I'll do, I'll burn it 2 or 3 times and then kill it, and then burn it 2 or 3 times and kill it, burn it, kill it. And when you do that, it's gonna flutter really hard and then just die. And when it does that, a lot of times you can fire one up and come grab that thing. That's for when they're really schooling up in the water column, they're pushing bait to the surface, anything like that. Because when you're burning it like that, it's really fluttering that bait on the back of that jig head. If you're not, if you're just gently, like today, we do have some fish that are chasing bait, but they're really chasing bait that are trying to get the cooler water coming out of these creek mouths, and they're mostly just stacked up there. It's not like they're chasing bait that are like aggressively running away from them. And to get those fish, I like to just kind of do a slow, steady wind like this, especially with this 1/8 ounce head. It's going to keep it down in the water just a little bit more, and it's going to give that bait just a nice, gentle shimmy, like any little bait fish would do, just kind of slowly swimming through the water. So that's all we're really doing with it today. We're looking for places that have a ton of bait, like points like this right here. There's a bunch of bait all over this point, and I'm just slowly winding this thing back. And when I'm doing that, it looks like one of those small bait fish that are young of the year, just hanging out, getting some cooler water in these creek mouths. And we'll see if we can trick us a smallmouth here. There's one. Feels like a decent one too. Oh, he is a decent one. Let's see if we can get him up in the boat here. There we go. I was burning it across this little shallow flat here, and he just couldn't resist it. He swam right out and grabbed it. I did actually just have another bite there. So again, I was reeling it really, really slowly, and that's how I was working it originally. But as soon as I had a bite, there's other ones with it, so I started reeling a little bit faster, and another one came back and got it. So not a bad one there for the Pittsburgh Rivers. We're gonna go ahead and hit spot lock here. We're gonna try and catch us one more. We're gonna see. We have a couple other creek mouths we have lined up down the river here. We're gonna see if we can get one more. He's got like a weird little hump back there, but not a bad fish. And we're gonna get back to it and see if we can catch us another one of these schoolers on that pulse jig. And the one last thing to remember with this pulse jig, we talked about the long rod, which is key. Getting that far cast is super important. And using this 1/8 ounce jig head, that hair jig type rod is really what you need to do to get a cast long enough to get to these fish, especially because this bait can catch them here, there, and anywhere in between. As long as it's working in the water, you got a chance of getting a bite. So I really like getting that long cast out there to try and get a bite anywhere. And especially, a lot of those schooling fish are kind of spooky, so if you can keep your boat away from them, you have a much better chance of catching a fish. So making that long cast is key. And the most important thing, especially when using this 1/8 ounce jig head, is to pay attention to the speed of your reel, especially when you're trying to do that slow, steady retrieve. So it looks like I'm reeling really fast, which I am right now. That was a missed fish right there. But when you reel that fast, like if you might not feel like you're reeling that fast, that bait's lifting way, way up off the bottom, solely because that bill, like this has no weight to it. It's only an 1/8 ounce bait. So there's no weight really associated with this. And that bill has so much lift associated with it that it's gonna pull your bait up to the surface. So if you want it to stay down in the strike zone, you have to reel painfully slow. It'll feel like you're reeling way too slow and your bait isn't doing anything, but I promise you just that subtle vibration is enough to make that tail do the work, and the rest will happen as you just make your slow, steady retrieve. So we're gonna fish this little corner back here and see if there's any bait kind of stacked back out of the current. And then we're gonna work on to the next creek mouth. There's another one right there we might hit next. Well, unfortunately, we have quickly run out of daylight. The last creek mouth I was about to go hit there was already a person sitting on it, bank fishing, and I didn't want to go interrupt him. So we hit all the creek mouths on the way down through here. Caught us a couple fish on the pulse fish lures. I wish I could stay out here a little bit longer and keep catching them. It's such a fun bite. They've been biting it very, very well today. But like I said, ran out of daylight, so it's time to head home. But if you enjoyed today's video, check out the link below, grab some of these, and go give them a shot on your local body of water. Hit that subscribe button down below so you don't miss any more of my fishing tips coming up. And check out that video right there if you want to see another pulse fish item that I really like to use and a different way to rig it up to catch even more smallmouth bass. Thanks for watching.